All right, good evening, everyone. It seems like it's been a long time since I've seen you guys. I guess with the holiday and hurricanes and Dr. Shanman, um, it all affects the schedule to some degree. But I'm glad that all of you are here this evening. I have the pleasure of being able to talk to you about punishment procedures. All right, so we'll have some fun with that. Hope that you're interested in learning about punishment procedures. And I hope that you are going to hold your preconceived notions at the door to make sure that your prior knowledge doesn't interfere with what I am going to try to teach you this evening. So here's our agenda for this evening. Mentoring updates, again, you do not have to have your item submitted to Moodle by the due dates, but it needs to be submitted by the mentor for the due dates. I've really been impressed with both the level of feedback that you're getting from the mentors, as well as how you're incorporating that in your submissions. And just keep in mind that in order for me to, or Dr. Shanman, presumably, to give you a score on something for research summaries and then subsequently for data collections, we'll need to see what you submitted, what they gave you as a response, and how did you respond to that, basically. And most of you, at least that I've seen, have incorporated that in your submissions, and usually the color coding system is helpful. So just keep that in mind, keep up what you're doing. I think it's really been beneficial. Number two, I want to introduce you virtually to Mr. Rob Stevens. He is our librarian that is assigned basically to a College of Ed graduate studies. And since our program is one that engages in quite a bit of research, it's time that you will get to know him. He is relatively new to the College of Ed as a library assistant. He's been a librarian for a long time. However, he has been tremendously helpful. So short-term objective number one, make sure you can use the library's website to find articles. And I am going to try to go through a short little query for you right now in order for you to see how it's beneficial. Secondly, anything you need full text for that you are not finding in the library's website, if you send him a screenshot, a cut and paste of the citation, he will be able to get that article out to you very quickly. Sometimes they have to be ordered from other universities that we share with, but so far this semester that hasn't happened at all for me. If you do email him, I would recommend you tell him what program you're in, what class you're taking, and that you are one of Dr. Gotra and Dr. Shanman's candidates. And I think that'll help in the process. You can also use Google Scholar to find things. However, what it's not going to do, first of all, don't use Google, use Google Scholar if you are going to not use the library's website. But it's not necessarily going to ensure that everything you find will be peer reviewed. And if it doesn't give you the full text article, it's not going to be able to tell you whether Nichols has the full text article or not. So it may be convenient for that reason, I think use it. However, it may add some extra steps. So you really need to be well versed in how to use Google Scholar and the library's website. All right, so let's see if I can take you through that right now quickly. I need a new window. here's what I needed. I could see that might help. All right. Don't pay it. You shouldn't be seeing anything right now. I mean, maybe you do, but I'm just trying to log in. Then once I log in, I'll get you back on here. All right, let's see if this is going to help. All right, let me go back. And I know some of you have gone through this before, but it definitely pays to keep practicing. All right, you should see the library's webpage, which you can pretty much reach from whether you're using your phone, iPad, or laptop, desktop, whatever. If you scroll at the bottom of the home page, there's a link that will take you directly to the library. So when you get to the web page, you will see library search. And generally speaking, I will punishment procedures. Let's try that. It's going to force you to log in. If you're using your touch screen, it should be relatively easy. So I'll give you a little interesting tidbit while that powers up. About a month ago, I sliced the tip of my finger off completely. And it's grown back for the most part. I didn't know if it was going to, but it sliced off my fingerprint and I could not open anything. And do you know, when you call Apple, there is a division for dismembered occurrences. So if you've cut off your hand or other things that you need to access, there will be people that will help you. And it's not a crazy request. So I mean, it made me feel very comfortable. And I think now I've just gotten to a place where I guess what stayed was enough to remember who I was. I also found out that it is highly possible when you do something like that and whenever it grows back, your fingerprint may be off enough to where it might not work, all right? So anyway, okay, so I've looked this up. You saw what I did. It was not a very response, effortful type of thing. And I got 1,034 hits in about 5 seconds, if that long. In turn, I'm not going to go through 1 million possibilities, right? I have to teach myself how to run through things pretty quickly, or how to maybe call up some other options to narrow things down, all right? Notice here, it says limit to. So I do want full text and I do want scholarly. Well, let me check scholarly now. Now that's taken me down to about a third. So the way I look at it is I've cut off 700,000 things that I'm not going to waste my time looking at. And then you could kind of quickly see how I've kind of become intertwined with the justice community. So we're looking at criminal procedures. So let's maybe look at punishment and maybe behavior or something like that, and see if that changes anything. And we have some Lithuanian options. Effects of punishment. So I'm getting closer and closer to what, and maybe let's change it to positive punishment. All right, and I'm a little bit closer to what I'm looking for here. So I could keep using some words here in order to help narrow my field. Now, I could kind of make a decision. What if I want to see a certain author? So I still keep my search words in here, and then I may go to author. And I have 15 responses. So that might help me narrow things down. Let's say I want to look at a specific population. Oh, never mind. I did it wrong. I'm still under author. All right. So what I would do is look. I hope you guys can see what I'm clicking on. Can you? All right. I can click on all text. That means anywhere in the paper. Have to remember to change that. Let's see what happens there. I'm down to 10,000. So, and each one of those I should be able to pull up directly. You may find some really good articles that might not show up as a full text option, but our good friend Rob can get them for us, okay? All right, so don't discount those types of things. Let's let the people that will help us help us. So I hope that was user-friendly enough to see how advantageous it is to maybe start here. And you could get as complicated or as simplistic as you want in the search. If I click on advanced search, there's all kind of things for me to click on. I'll go back to basic. Sometimes it might make it harder than what it is, and we don't want to do that. So pretty much any configuration you want to research something for, with, on, you should be able to do it in a pretty user-friendly manner. So I hope that this was helpful to you. I know that anything that can save you time generally is helpful. And I know that when you're looking up articles, that can be overwhelming. Where do you start? How do you find something? What if you have to pay for it? You should not be having to pay for very much, all right? And before, even if Rob comes back and says, no go, involve me in that conversation and we'll get to the bottom of it, all right? Any questions about what I just shared with you? Do you need me to review something else? Check the chat window. All right. So in one of your activities, you had to share with us some schedules of reinforcement that are already in place at your practicum site, where you work, at your house, in the car. That doesn't really matter, as long as you had a venue by which you could respond to the question. So for the most part, I mean, everybody followed that direction, but I think there was an aspect of it that I want to be clear about regarding why identifying these things are very important. So the first thing I saw most of you do was to simply identify if it was continuous or intermittent, and then fixed or variable, then ratio or interval. I kind of saw that, but then I did not see anything specific regarding this is an FR1, this is an FI4. I saw some information and I almost had to calculate it in some instances. The reason why that's so important is when you're trying to figure out what's going wrong or what you need to do that's right, the first question you are going to ask yourself is, what's the schedule of reinforcement? That's not about what tactics or strategies you have in place related to reinforcement. It's what are the schedules of reinforcement for the various behaviors, those you want to increase, obviously, because you can't have a schedule of reinforcement for behaviors you want to decrease. You would have a punishment procedure in place for that. That's not to say that you can't increase a target behavior and decrease a kind of a complementary or supplementary behavior, a behavior that's incompatible with the target behavior. That, of course, is going to happen. That's not happening because of the schedule of reinforcement that is attached to what you're trying to decrease. That happens because of the schedule of reinforcement you're attaching to what you're trying to increase. So with that said, what I didn't see was the next level of analysis. All right, we have a continuous reinforcement schedule. It's a fixed schedule and it's a fixed ratio. Check, check, check. But a fixed ratio of what? That will become one of the biggest variables that you are going to have to be well versed in determining and in determining if that needs to change. That's why figuring it out is very telling, because if you can't figure it out, you really don't have a schedule of reinforcement in place. You have some reinforcement in place, but in all likelihood, but it's not really an appropriate schedule of reinforcement. So I guess to some degree, what I'm sharing with you is that if you cannot ascertain that, then that gives you some really good feedback, all right? That tells you what you may have to adjust first, and then come up with what that schedule of reinforcement might need to be to start off with. And then when you're adjusting the dials, you're starting with that to begin with. With that said, I think there were a few responses where people talked to me about kids had access to certain things at a fixed time in the day. So it was a fixed schedule of reinforcement. Access to computers, access to recess, access to lunch, or something like that. And that's where I think some of the wires were crossed. That actually means you're not on a schedule of reinforcement. It's a non-contingent schedule. Non-contingent reinforcement, not based on behavior, it's based on the time of day. So it's 12 o'clock, so everybody's going on their computer for 15 minutes of free time. That's a non-contingent schedule of reinforcement, because if you look at all your schedules, there's not one that's going to fit into that, because it's not contingent on behavior. And for those reasons where I'm illustrating the disconnect is why I want to make sure that you guys are going to go back and review some of that stuff. All right. So
Dr. Grant.
Yes.
Sorry, it's Murray. But what if we make it contingent? Like, we recognize that it's about to be recess and we increase the tokens so that they can turn them in so that they can go. Is that
the question, right, Marie? So you did that, the tokens were on an FR. Don't get confused with the backup reinforcer dictating the schedule of reinforcement. All right, okay. What I want to know is, what is the schedule of reinforcement for the delivery of tokens for the appropriate behavior? That's your schedule of reinforcement.
But what if the token board, you have several programs going, okay? So you have, they manned they're sitting in their seat correctly, and it's a fixed, it's an F1 for every man, and it's a
Yep. So that's one.
variable,
That's a schedule of
variable,
reinforcement for that behavior. Okay, we got that check. What's the next one?
the variable ratio of hands in lap. I don't know. I'm trying to think of a client that I worked with that this came into play with. So if you know what's going on, you know that it's close to recess, you know it's close to whatever, is it wrong to force, not force, contrive, I think maybe is the word, the behaviors so that it appears that they've completed their token board, they turn it in, and then they get to go to recess?
Okay, if it's related to, okay, so there's nothing wrong with contriving the environment. You have two options. You capture the environment or you contrive it. That's it. That's the only two options.
Right.
Or you let it go and you miss the opportunity. But I am saying as a practitioner, those are your two options. Now, if that results in the emission of the target behavior, I don't care how you got them there, they emitted the behavior and you had a contingent reinforcement system involved that involved an appropriate schedule of reinforcement. When I'm saying appropriate, I don't mean it was the perfect schedule. I mean that it was appropriate, that it is a legitimate schedule of reinforcement.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does. So
Okay,
it just
let's
really,
take the same scenario, 5 minutes before recess, and the target behaviors are not being emitted. And you're like, I like the way you're breathing, you have nice shoes on, and I like to say your name, okay, and you're delivering tokens. You might, that is not contriving the situation to evoke behavior. That is basically delivering tokens just to deliver them, and meaning, AKA, at a certain time, this kid's walking out of this room. And that's a non-contingent schedule of reinforcement. Before you respond to that, non-contingent schedule of reinforcement is a very well-utilized tactic in the behavioral literature. It is one of the tactics that's of the 300 or so ABA tactics. It's just not necessarily a clean schedule of reinforcement because there is no appropriate behavior. A lot of times, if the child is emitting physically escaping, so escape behavior, and they're doing it every 20 minutes, and you're having to call the crisis team, one of the things that you can do for NCR, non-contingent reinforcement, is every 15 minutes, that kid's taking a walk. All right. And
right.
what you're looking for is a reduction in elopement and adherence to the NCR. Okay.
Correct. Okay.
That does not
Okay.
yield one of the schedules of reinforcement that we learned about.
Okay. So when you're in a classroom with a teacher and it's recess time and the client has been just the behaviors, you just haven't been able to get them under control, okay? Is it reinforcing the child when we still let them go to recess, even though they haven't met any expectations for the day?
Possible that occurs, right? If that is a
Yeah.
source of reinforcement, then they're going to have access to it likely. Okay. That might happen. That happens all the time. And what I
Right.
mean by that is we all have behaviors that inadvertently get reinforced. In order to lead lives that are habilitative in nature, AKA we're not going to get thrown in jail and, other bad things, we have to have more contingent reinforcement than In that aspect, Marie, you're not talking about non-contingent reinforcement more than you might be talking about contingent reinforcement for inappropriate behavior. That's possible also. Okay, and that's what you run the risk of doing when you have an NCR schedule, because it's time-based. It's
Right.
time to do the thing, and you're doing it. All right. So you know, because we went over this, and I think you know this from your experience, you're going to always reinforce the behavior that happens right before it, whether you intend to do that or not. So those are all considerations. So if a child has 100 times a day access to non-contingent reinforcement or access to things, regardless of behavior, all right, if whether it's time-based, NCR, or not time-based, so they don't have to emit appropriate behavior to get something, it's going to be hard to put in 2 or 3 reinforcement strategies to counter that. The tide is definitely against that child in terms of shaping behavior at that point.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sure. All right. Any questions about schedules of reinforcement? I did not necessarily require that very many of you go back and fix that, but I am asking you if you had something that kind of flies in the face of what I'm telling you, please take it upon yourself to think about that. All right. You want to be able to answer the question like this. For raising her hand, that behavior is on a VR3 schedule of reinforcement, because on average, about every 3 times that she raises her hand, we deliver points. How many points and what she's trading in for, that is not about the schedule of reinforcement. All right. All right. So I'm trying to unconfuse you, if you are, and provide additional examples. So I want to make sure that you guys don't have any further questions. All right. Well, we may circle back to this before the end of class. Be on the lookout. Get ready. But now we're going to shift into punishment. And we are going to take a couple of weeks to go over punishment. We'll try to get through positive punishment today and negative punishment next week. I think, to my knowledge, that Dr. Shanman, hold on, I don't think I'm sharing my screen here. Bear with me. I don't think that Dr. Shanman started the punishment chapter. The last time I staffed with him, he told me that he did finish the schedules of reinforcement chapter. We're going to revisit some of those complex schedules once we talk about punishment, because some of those can get pretty technical. And the trick with that is most of the reinforcement schedules are pretty complex. As you know, Marie was just sharing, she was talking about all of these different multiple or chained or tandem schedules of reinforcement that exist, and that's the reality. I wish it would be as simple as having one schedule of reinforcement that you could knock out with everything. All right, now I think you're seeing something here. Okie dokie. one thing I want to put out there is that punishment is a principle of behavior. That means the tactics that are related to punishment are tactics that behavior analysts and ed diagnosticians and special education teachers need to be very familiar with. You have to be a responsible practitioner. And that means you have to know when to use punishment procedures. You have to know when you have to use them with other procedures, and you have to know when it's not appropriate to use punishment procedures. So keep that in mind. And it is likely that in your career, regardless of which one of those options you find yourself in, at some point in time, you're going to have a client. You're going to have a client that you'll have to use a punishment procedure with. With that said, punishment procedures are very misused. They're not very well understood, and they're controversial. A lot of times, in terms of what I've seen, people resort to punishment procedures first. Oh, we've got to stop him from doing that. He can't do that in front of other kids. They're going to copy it. Oh my God, we can't have that in this building. There needs to be consequences. And that's the other thing that people confuse all the time. They think that the word consequences is associated with punishment only. Consequences simply mean what? Can someone tell me?
What happens after the behavior?
That's it. That is it. So whether it's intentional or not, went to the drive-up window to get cash, the cash came out of the ATM machine. After I pushed my right PIN number, that was the reinforcement for pushing in the right PIN number. If I would have not pushed in the right PIN number, I don't think I would have gotten my cash. Maybe I would have gotten somebody else's, but, and maybe that could have been a reinforcer. I don't know. But, you know, I want you to understand that the consequences are simply just what happens after that. Okay. So our day is completely inundated with antecedents, responses to those antecedents, and consequences. Whether there's the consequence angel or demon over us, or it's just how things happen, the way life unfolds. It's whatever happens after. So remember that, and a reliance on punishment will lead to coercive control. You cannot condition school, condition subject areas, condition learning through aversive control. No matter, that is not my opinion. That is not, you know, my mantra for how I operate as a practitioner. You know, that's not why I'm sharing that with you. The overuse of aversive contingencies. You can get a child to sit in that chair and not blink through aversive contingencies. Somebody's going to walk in and be like, oh my God, this classroom is so well managed. All the children look like they're frozen in time. You don't even have an expression on people's faces. You're going to get reinforced by that through your administrators, other people that walk in your classroom. However, none of those kids, if they are sitting in fear for what might happen to them, they're not ready to learn. So that's why it's not just about what it looks like, it's about, are they really in a place where learning is starting to become a reinforcer? How do we know that? Well, we don't always know that. We know that by what we measure. And if what we measure starts to show us that, then clearly we're on the right track. One of the most transformative books that I read as part of a punishment procedure. So I was taking a class in behavior analysis, and I was not necessarily turning in things in a timely fashion. I was still learning how to balance some things. And I felt like I was drowning, which I'm sure most of you feel like that right now. And so I guess as a punishment procedure, the professor had me read a book called Coercion by Murray Sidman. And it was not a punishment procedure, but boy, did I think it was one, because how was it going to be a reinforcer if the size of the book was this thick? All right. And I was like, oh gosh, with all the things I have to do, clearly I'm not coming across conveying a message. I'm trying to convey that I'm struggling to keep up. And what did I get in return? I have to read the book Coercion by Murray Sidman. Well, it was transformative because I realized in the very explicit everyday life examples that he provided in that book, how much that coercive control actually steered me in the wrong direction. And coercion and aversiveness is part of our everyday lives, right? If you speed, you're probably going to get a speeding ticket if you're in a highly policed area, right? And if you spend money that you don't have, the bank might charge you an NSF charge. All of those things are based on behavioral principles, all right? And so coercion, aversive interactions, and coercion, it is part of our lives. But when that becomes the predominant way of shaping behavior, the long-term effects are detrimental. And I see that play out every day. I see that play out from the beginning of my career until now. I see that play out when I reflect on some of my instructional practices as an early special education teacher. And there were many times that I wanted to go back 25 years and write people a check for putting their kids under coercion, you know, and holding them to task on when I just didn't know any better. And unfortunately, you know, it's like any other dosage of something. You got to know when to deliver that dosage and under what conditions. And then all the principles of behavior are working for you instead of some working for you sometimes and the rest working against you. And you know, that has been associated with getting approvals from administration, getting approvals from you know, people in charge, and so on. People want to see that you're going to do something about a problem when the problem occurs. And that's where, you know, we have a bifurcation. There's a difference between doing something about something at that moment in time to survive that 30 seconds of horrific whatever's happening versus trying to solve that problem long term. And you developing a competency to understand the difference, and even understanding when you might have to survive in that 30 seconds, but you're going to become very savvy as to the fact that, yeah, what I just did got the child off of the table who was throwing down all the bookcases, but I probably reinforced some inappropriate behavior when I did that. Knowing is always better than not knowing. So keep that in mind. You will see some common threads with what we talk about here this evening and comparing it to reinforcement. In a lot of ways, reinforcement and punishment are at opposite ends of the spectrum. One of the differences is that with reinforcement, if it truly is a reinforcer by definition, we're going to see a behavior increase. And then with punishment, if it truly is a punisher, by definition, we should see a behavior decrease. If it doesn't do that, then you don't have a reinforcer attached to the appropriate behavior, and you don't have a punisher attached to the inappropriate behavior. You're not punishing a person, just like you're not reinforcing a person. That was something I also kind of caught in some of your schedules of reinforcement activity. You know, again, saying things like, he's reinforced for doing that and she's reinforced for doing this. I get what you're saying, but the specifics about using the right vocabulary of the science of behavior is tremendously related to the appropriate use of behavior analysis and outcomes for children. That's why you got to get that in check right now early on, because it's going to actually kind of put you in a little rabbit hole that's going to be hard to get out of. Get the right use of the vocabulary right now. You might have to look it up. You might have to check with me. You might have to reach out to another professor. You might have to, God forbid, Google it. You might have to ask your mentor, but get it right. And it's not fluent for you right now. And it shouldn't be. Why would it be? This is hard stuff. So all of those things that I just want you to keep in mind as we proceed to talk about this. So for the reasons that punishment is kind of diametrically opposed to reinforcement, I don't believe we're going to have to go into as much detail about punishment in general. All right. We end up with a 3-term contingency. We have an antecedent that evoked a response and a consequence that's supposed to be aversive. And it's the aversiveness that actually determines if it truly is a punisher, right? In the sense that if walking in fire is not aversive, then it might serve as a reinforcer for you. There's some deviant behavior that for us or for some people, it does serve as punishers, but maybe for us or some people, it serves as reinforcers, the consequences that are associated with that. So we don't define whether something's a punishment procedure. And that's why having a predetermined list of what is a punisher, you know, consequences for behavior problems in a school setting. Great, that might be a wonderful place to start, but is it a punisher for the very behaviors that we're trying to attach it to? We can only determine if it's a punisher by measuring something and determining if that changed, if it decreased. We're looking at the decrease, just like with reinforcement. We're not looking at the increase in the appropriate behavior at that moment in time. We're looking at the decrease of the future frequency of the behavior. Again, let me reiterate this. When that behavior happened, it's already occurred, all right? It's been emitted. Okay, that is not what your gauge is going to be, whether the behavior is going to increase or decrease. It's as you collect the data subsequently, what is it showing you? As you continue to have these procedures, these contingencies in place consistently, what happens to the behavior over time? All right, we have 2 different types of punishment procedures, just like we had 2 different types of reinforcement procedures. With positive punishment, we're presenting something in the environment that is aversive. With positive reinforcement, we're presenting something in the environment that would appear to be somewhat desirable. So the presentation of an aversive stimuli, that's what happens in positive punishment. Negative punishment, we already have something that is pleasurable likely occurring. All right, I'm delivering tokens, and now you did something, and I have to take one back. All right, that would be negative punishment. What I'm taking back is something that is desirable. But when you compare it to negative reinforcement, what I'm removing is something aversive. The cold draft, the tight shoes, the homework, those types of things, those are all based on negative reinforcement. reinforcement when we talked about that before, but negative punishment, we're removing something that is pleasurable. You lost privileges is based on negative punishment. Whether that serves as a punisher or not, you're not going to know until you put it in place consistently and you see its impact on behavior. Here is a very critical piece to understand negative reinforcement, negative punishment. If you are engaging in negative punishment, which again, positive and negative do not have social connotations. That's not good or bad. It's mathematical. Plus or minus, in or out. If you're engaging in negative punishment, you have to have a motivating operation in place for the reinforcer to have an effect anyway. So let's talk about tokens, since I think that's something almost everybody mentioned. If you are delivering tokens and it's not a reinforcer, taking them away will not necessarily create the environment that somebody will not want to lose a token. If they're not trading in, if you don't see it having an impact as an increaser of behavior when you're delivering it, the likelihood of losing it may be minimized. Not saying it's not going to have any impact, but you're definitely not setting up a reinforcement contingency for the individual to want to work, to earn. You might be setting one up for, I'm going to do this so you don't take it away. And that by itself will fall flat on its face at some point in time. It's going to be really hard to condition up reading, doing math, when I'm just fearful about what might happen to me. All right. In order not to confuse you with the positive and negative social connotation, the field of behavior analysis determined that, well, we're going to talk about type 1 punishment as positive punishment and type 2 punishment as negative punishment. Then that will distinguish it from reinforcement and from positive and negative connotations. Not sure it's always that helpful. I agree that type 1 and type 2 would be maybe beneficial to use with reinforcement also, but you really only hear it associated with punishment. Overall, again, we are talking about aversive control, and we are talking about an operant that is formed within the 3-term contingency, just like on the reinforcer side. So you end up teaching someone what not to do under those conditions with a punishment procedure, as opposed to what to do under reinforcement procedures, right? So you're going to still get operants that are formed from both. What are the 3 terms of an operant? Can anybody tell me? What do you have to identify that are there to see that someone has learned something over time? Number 1 is there has to be a what?
Behavior.
Before the behavior.
Yes, yeah.
Yes, you got it. Number 2, then there has to be a.
Behavior.
Yep, and then there has to be a.
Consequence.
Correct. All right. Now, if that consequence is reinforcement, you're going to get an operant that forms, and it's going to be in the direction of something that is you're trying to teach, you're trying to increase. And if an operant that is formed under punishment consequences, you're going to get something that teaches a decrease. And so what happens is there's discriminative effects of that. All right, let's pretend that I'm driving and I'm at a traffic light at a certain intersection where word on the street is never a cop in this area. There are no cameras. I am not going to get a ticket for running the red light. So there is no punishment. for running the red light. Actually, there's reinforcement. Okay, because you get through and you didn't have an accident. You get through and you're getting to where you want to go faster. You get through and so on. But then the traffic light that's at Troop C, off of the interstate, whatever, that light, the cops are there all the time, all right? So I'm not gonna run the red light there. So what has happened based on punishment, I've developed discriminative effects. Same stimulus, same possible response, but because of the consequences, my behavior is different. Does that make sense? So with the discriminative effects of reinforcement, I learned what to do. I learned that when you put red and green and yellow, and you tell me to point to red, I don't point, I point to red and not the other colors. That's based on the discriminative effects of reinforcement. However, if I've been making a lot of errors and you're doing a correction procedure with me and I start pointing to red, that could be based on the discriminative effects of punishment. So that's how they can work together. And that's why you want to make sure when they start pointing to red, you deliver reinforcement for that. All right. We could go through some of this. Here are just some very canned different punishment contingencies. I think that they're pretty straightforward. We do not need to unpack those, but we need to unpack some other things. What we know about punishment is we know that when you discontinue it, the effects of the procedure will no longer be intact. They're not necessarily permanent. Like with reinforcement, you could have a condition punisher just like you could have a condition reinforcer. But when the pairing goes away with punishment, you're going to actually see the behavior increase. So it's going to get worse. It might go back to where it was before, and in all likelihood, it's going to get worse. All right, and that's what we call recovery from punishment. When punishment is dismissed, that's kind of where you see the resurgence. That's why you need other tactics to go with it. Now, there are some exceptions to that rule. If you have someone that's splitting their head open, you might not be able to hurry up and figure out some reinforcement procedures to save that person's life. But it's only to that degree where we may have to be concerned about immediately putting punishment procedures in place. All right, if you have a really intensive punishment procedure, when you remove it, it may leave the behavior at 0 rates of responding. This is different from extinction. You have a whole different chapter on extinction. Extinguishing a behavior through extinction is different from bringing a behavior to 0 levels based on punishment. Can anyone tell me what, since we didn't cover this yet, can anyone tell me with extinction, what is occurring differently than with punishment? What's the difference? Anybody wants to take a stab at it? Because I think it's a word that people use, right? So can anyone tell me? All right, I guess you're turning in the towel. Oh, I heard something. Was that a...
Yeah, I was thinking maybe it was more on the point, you know, with punishment, you're decreasing the behavior through aversive means. With extinction, maybe, and look, I haven't gotten to read about it yet. Maybe you're focusing the behavior somewhere else so that this behavior is no longer reinforced. Therefore, maybe it goes away in that essence. That's a big guess.
Yeah, all right. You said the magic word. You've identified the source of reinforcement and you've withheld it. You're making sure the behavior doesn't contact the reinforcement. That's the difference. With punishment, you're not necessarily doing that. You're trying to provide an aversive consequence to the behavior, but that doesn't guarantee all reinforcement will be cut off. Example, you've determined that a child's frivolous question asking has been reinforced by attention. So you cut off the reinforcement using a planned ignoring tactic. That is an extinction procedure. But if it gets reinforced by the peers responding to the question, you didn't really, it's still contacting reinforcement, okay? Same example with, so that was an example with an extinction tactic, but you didn't extinguish it because you haven't cut off all the reinforcement. Next one is, let's say you decide I'm going to put in a punishment procedure for asking frivolous questions. I have put in a response cost, negative punishment. Every question they ask that's frivolous, you have to determine what that is. You will remove points. But they're still contacting reinforcement from attention by their peers. So you have a source of reinforcement that is still alive and well, and you have a punishment procedure that actually may not be associated with the source of the problem. And if you want to think about it, like you extinguish a fire, you cut off oxygen supply to that fire. With extinction, you're cutting off the oxygen to the behavior. But with punishment, you're delivering an aversive consequence. That's the difference. Say that 5 times in the mirror and backwards, and you're going to start understanding the difference. It's really important. They're both principles of behavior that we need to learn how to use correctly, but they're not the same. All right. Just like we have unconditioned and conditioned punishers, reinforcers, we have unconditioned and conditioned punishers. God. All right. With unconditioned punishers, those are things that are associated with a biological nature. What are we created as humans to actually avoid? We don't walk through fire. We pull our hands out of hot water. The things that serve as reinforcers, when we're missing them, it can be a very punishing situation, right? If somebody's withholding water, think about what hostages go through. All of those tactics that their captors are utilizing are all unconditioned punishers to start off with, okay? I take away all the blankets. You sleep on a concrete floor. Those types of things would all have a biological function, because if we continue to engage in them, we won't exist anymore. So that's what unconditioned punishers are. Conditioned punishers, however, have been paired with other conditioned punishers and or unconditioned punishers through stimulus-stimulus pairing, and they acquire punishing characteristics. However, if you continue to present the unconditioned punisher without the punisher that it was paired with, the effectiveness will go away, because it's not the same as with conditioned reinforcers. It acquires those properties, but they need to stay paired on a variable schedule. If they're just presented by itself, over time, the organism will habilitate to it. And it's just not exactly the same thing. So this is one of the differences. So let's say every time I show you this cup, it is, and you hold it, it's burning hot. All right, so the cup in and of itself is neutral. It doesn't have punishing qualities just yet, but it's burning hot and you drop it. It's burning hot and you drop it. Well, the cup, when you see it, will start to provide some pretty aversive, it's going to be an aversive antecedent. You're going to respond to it accordingly. And then you're going to stop using the cup. But if over time you forget about it and you touch it and it was like, wait, it's not burning hot again. Oh, wait, it's not burning hot again. Wait, it's not burning hot again. Then that cup will not evoke the same response from you. And if you want to know why I'm using this as an example, is right before the session started, I heated this up instead of for 1 minute, for 10 minutes. And when I grabbed it out of the microwave, it was like, woo! And then I had to stick my hand in my ice machine. And I think it ended up making me a little late to this session. So, you know, that would have to happen several times before the cup starts to bear punishing characteristics. And then if it stops happening, it's going to stop bearing those punishing characteristics. So that's the difference between condition reinforcers and condition punishers. With the condition reinforcer, it continues to act as such over time. All right, we also can go through a paradigm called verbal analog conditioning. Maybe, and it really makes a huge difference to things that serve as condition punishers for ourselves. Snake, I've never held a snake in my life, all right? But when I see one, I kind of go in the other direction. I've never been bit by one. Maybe I've seen someone else. I haven't seen anybody else get bit. I've heard about it. I know snakes are poisonous. So through my verbal behavior, snakes can become quite aversive. And, you know, maybe I've seen the movie Snakes on the Plane. So through observational learning, maybe, you know, you can acquire reinforcement and punishment through observation, provided I have that capability. Not everybody has that capability. A lot of times that develops over the course of just our developmental trajectory, but a lot of times it doesn't. So keep that in mind. But through my verbal responses, that can end up conditioning something. And a lot of times it's a condition punisher. Generalized condition punishers are typically reprimands, scolding, disapprovals. Those are generalized condition punishers. So if you think about this, let's say you're on the subway in New York and you hear someone saying, stop, you really respond immediately, right? You're going to stop what you're not walking into that train. Now, that's quite different than if you hear someone say, hey, what's up? Right? You may orient towards them. However, the likelihood of that garnering your attention with millions of people on traveling by subway will be a little less likely. But stop, and if it's if a certain tone is used, of course, that's going to increase the likelihood that it's a generalized condition punisher. So specifically speaking, that is what we're talking about here. And over time, you know, we start understanding tone and how people say things, with what fervor they say it with. That's why a lot of times I'll get this from parents. Oh, he's not following in any of your directions because you're not using a forceful enough tone. Okay, well, they're not following my directions because we taught them the only time you really need to follow them is when I'm using a forceful tone. And that contrast has taught them not to follow them when I'm using a regular tone. And that is likely because the source of reinforcement for listening to adult authority figures has not formed. It's not there. But when I hear something that sounds aversive, I'm going to respond. Again, you need both. Tanya, don't go into the fire. Okay? Miss, don't go into the fire. Miss, there's a bomb there. Okay? You know, we want someone to respond to that. And that might sound differently if you're like, oh, ma'am, I think there might be a bomb right there. Don't go there. All right? That might come across as sounding a little different. All right? Might not get your attention because one is a conditioned punisher. All right, so we're not going to define punishers by their physical properties. I work with a lot of parents. A lot of times they want to talk to me about all the kids in the family, which is great. And I'll always hear things like, you know, just the homework's not getting done. I send him to his bedroom every night, no TV. And, you know, so I'm punishing him every night. Well, if we don't see a reduction in the problem that's leading to the homework not being done, it's not a punisher. So it's not what it looks like, it's what impact does it have. All right, so just like with reinforcement, there are lots of different things that impact the nature of punishment. A lot of these were related to reinforcement. That's where I want to leave you with in terms of how deep we're getting into this conversation this evening. What I do want to shift to are some opportunities for Q&A about punishment. And we're going to shift to another document right now, which is going to allow us to respond to that. All right, so let's get some good questions going here. And now I see we have something in the chat window. And none of these items are items that I want. So that's not good.
So I have maybe a guidance question, Dr. Gautreaux.
Mhm.
Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
All right. So I have had my students for probably 2 good solid full days since school started with the you know, not being in school with the hurricanes and all. But
Sure.
I started with I would say a variable ratio of reinforcement on the very first day, and
Do you mind describing what that was? I just want to make sure we're on the same page.
so it was an average of reinforcement.
For doing what?
Go ahead.
For doing what? What was the behavior?
For sitting at the desk,
Okay.
for completing the first task.
Okay, whoa, wait. Okay. Sitting at the desk, is that a behavior that you're trying to shape?
Yes.
Okay, now, so here's my question. Is completing the task not at your desk acceptable?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, that's a good question.
All right, yeah. So,
Shoot.
and we could talk hypothetically, but it's possible that the yoked behavior could be sitting at the desk and working on your assignment. Completing something is not a behavior. What you do to complete it is a behavior.
Okay.
Okay, so keep that in mind. So if you're telling me while I'm completing my assignment, I have to be seated, then together, that is my definition of behavior.
Okay.
Okay, now, I don't think you're on a variable ratio because I don't know how you would end up with one instance of that behavior. I think you're on a variable interval for that.
Oh, yes, that's
Okay,
right.
now, if you would have told me the child has 10 responses in their work packet, and for every response, they write an answer for. If they do it while they're seated, then they get a point. That is a FR1 for the yoking of those two behaviors. You have to be in your seat and you have to write an answer. Okay? If that's what you're talking about, it is a ratio and it may be fixed.
It is variable interval.
Aha, okay. All right. So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but
Oh, that's okay.
it's a variable interval because on average of every 3 minutes, if I looked and they were still working,
Yes.
that's when you're delivering the reinforcement.
Yes.
Correct? Or the potential reinforcement.
Yes.
This came up in some of the activities also. It's a different reinforcement paradigm if what you're done is after the interval goes off, if you're reinforcing because they stayed working the entire interval, then that is a different type of schedule of reinforcement. It's a different reinforcement paradigm, all right? Because remember, by definition, it's the interval elapses and the first correct response after that gets reinforced, okay? It almost ends up being the equivalent of a momentary time sampling, but we didn't get into that just yet. But I want you to remember that interval is related to the first instance of a correct response after the interval has elapsed.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Now, so you see why all of that's important, CC, because you need that to even get to the part of your question that's relevant. You get what I'm saying?
Yes. Well, it was effective. Whatever I did was effective.
Look, but here's what you need to know. We don't know why things are effective unless we have the right data on it, okay? A lot of times we want to believe it's effective, but we don't know that. The data have to determine that. So now tell me the rest of the equation. We have one part of it. Tell me the rest of it.
So that was the first day. So today, the students.
So what happened? Wait. We don't know anything if that was the first day. What was measured in that? You had some contingency in place related to applying that to certain behaviors. What was measured to see if it increased or will increase?
Less talking. Or
to me, you put in a reinforcement schedule. So if you put in a reinforcement schedule, it has to be more of something.
Or okay, well, more compliance.
Okay. So more, a little bit too general. Compliance is not a behavior just like work completion. What you do that meets the requirements of compliance is what I was trying to do is show you that from the get-go. What is it that you wanted them to do under that schedule of reinforcement?
Complete the first assignment.
So what is the first assignment? What is it? I don't know what they're doing.
They are answering questions.
All right. Okay. So with the question, we have an antecedent, whether it's written, a response, and the consequence for that is your schedule of reinforcement. Okay. So here's my question. Do you see an increase in responses to questions?
Yes.
That needs to be the measure. Now, Cece, you can also measure things you don't want to see. Okay? But your primary measure needs to be what you want to see because you have a reinforcement contingency there.
Okay.
Okay? All right. What else do I need to know about this situation? Okay.
What do you mean? Or elaborate?
Is that Is that everything you wanted to tell me? Is there something that's part of this?
No, I'm sure there's, I'm sure there's more, but however, I am, oh, so where's this, what schedule, do I continue the same schedule for X amount of,
I don't know, because first of all, you don't know that until you're going to have at least a week and some worth of data. Okay.
okay,
Secondly, again, I don't know exactly what the schedule is.
I guess I'm figuring that out.
Clear, okay? But I want you to write that out for me. I want you to write exactly, you script it when you do it 3 times in a row. So when you're delivering the reinforcement, go backwards. I gave him a check. He did what before that? What was
Okay.
antecedent? And back into that. Then I'm going to be able to maybe shed some additional light on this. Okay.
Okay,
The thing that he's doing or she's doing prior to the delivery of the consequence, that's your measurement. Do you see more of that? Okay.
okay,
That's what you want to measure. All right.
great, okay, great,
All
thank
right.
you.
Yeah. Okay, let's look at some of these, guys. All right. Not going to read them to you. I want you to read them to yourselves. Let's move it up. Okay, this is good. We're going to try to do 3 at a time. Okay. And I'm going to give you 2 minutes to read through these. And when the 2 minutes are up, I want you to have written them down on something and show it to me. Just show me your answers. 1 letter, 2 letter, 3 letter. That's it. All right. You can do sign language or whatever, but I might have to Google all the signs to make sure I'm reading your signing correctly. Okay. So first one's about positive punishment. Second one is about what's not included in procedural guidelines for punishment and negative punishment. We did not cover all of these pieces, but I love using these questions to review what we just did and to preview you on what's to come. That's an example of a motivational operation. All right. So take a look at these. I am going to call us back up at 6:23, and I need you to have 3 responses there. You can put it in the chat window, but don't put it right now because I don't want everybody else to see. Okay. All right. Show me your answers now in some way, shape, or form. Okay. All right. Okay. Moving right along. Here we go. The first one is C. Good job. for those of you that had C, okay, the delivery of a stimulus after a behavior that decreases. So decreases is the magic word, and delivery. And that stimulus is likely going to be aversive. Now, number two, little different because we didn't get to that part yet. The second response is C. You don't want to start with the highest intensity of punishment. You do want to start with the least first to see if that gets you somewhere. And yes, it is recommended that the practitioner try to experience the punisher personally, and that's supposed to up the ethical dilemma that sometimes exists with punishers, okay? So the correct answer for number two is C, and you'll see that as you get through the chapter. You always start with the least intensive punishment procedure possible. And then number three is B. And so I really believed that you could get number three right because we went over number one. And those are kind of mirror images of each other in some ways. So we're removing something that is pleasant in order to decrease a behavior in the future. All right. Wasn't that fun and exciting? I could tell by the expression on your faces that you just cannot wait for the next round of questions. All right. Let's, what we're going to do is let's just do this in the chat window and let's do it quickly. All right. Which of the following statements are not part of the factors that influence the effectiveness of punishment? This is the slide I left you on. Okay. Not part of the factors that influence the effectiveness of punishment. Immediacy, schedule, intensity, punishment for alternative behaviors. Okay, post your answer in the chat windows now. Excellent. All right. It's reinforcement for alternative behaviors, not punishment for alternative behavior. Let's keep going. All right, let's do 5 and 6. The current status of knowledge regarding the use of punishment was rendered from research that was conducted over how many years ago? And then number 6, Mrs. Moody decided that because Johnny dumped the contents of his glue container on the floor, that he would not only have to clean up his workspace, but clean the entire classroom floor. Which one of these is describing what Miss Moody did? So 5 and 6. Don't post just yet. I'm going to call for you to post, and you can post it on the chat. You don't have to give me some hieroglyphics. So we need to pick a set of years. And notice the first one is research. So punishment has been in effect for a long time, but the research, okay? All right, show me your answers now. TD. All right. Good, almost everyone got the first one right. So no big deal. We're looking at about 40 years of research that we've been researching punishment effectively. So it's more than 10, but it's less than 70. That's a substantial amount of time. With number 6, of course, that was tricky because we didn't get to that part just yet. Restitutional overcorrection is a That's the answer, and that's a positive punishment procedure. So let me give you, and I'm going to leave you on this note. I can field some questions after, but with rest, there's two types of overcorrection procedure. One is positive practice overcorrection. The thing that you need to do right, you're going to do it over and over again. And for those of you that engage in error correction while you're delivering instruction with your clients, the error correction is typically based on positive practice error correction. So it's a positive punishment procedure, and you're practicing what you want them to do correctly. Restitutional overcorrection is another type of overcorrection procedure, but it is what is described here. What it means is this. Let's say I put some graffiti on my desk, all right? And the consequence for that is I have to clean my desk. I have to clean all the desks of the kids in the classroom. I have to mop the floors. I have to wipe the chalkboards. I have to empty all the trash cans. That is considered restitutional overcorrection because I have to return the entire environment to a condition that is vastly improved than what I left it with. Again, I'm not saying when to use that or when not to use that. I am certain there's some good opportunities to use that under the right conditions, but you have to understand the differences in the different types of positive punishment procedures. All right, now I can field some questions related to the content that we've covered this evening for clarity purposes, scenarios, all that good stuff, if you want to spend your time doing that. Kayla, I did want to reach out to you, however. I emailed you back a couple of times regarding a meeting times, but I haven't heard back from you. So I don't know if you're getting my emails. All right, that's just one thing. All right.
Oh, real quick, I've emailed you back twice and I didn't receive a response. So I don't know if we're having like a technical issue, because I emailed you back the first time and I emailed you back when you followed up with me. And so I was gonna try and catch you after class and see
well,
what's going on.
Spam. We're gonna go to some spam and take a look at that. All right.
Okay.
All right. Because I've done the searches. I'm an email hog, so I like to use my email as a filing system. So I never delete emails from students. So then I'll put in Lauren, Cece. Yeah, and I pull them all up. So I keep doing that, but it's not pulling up. Anyway, I'm glad that you said that. All right, what about questions related to punishment or reinforcement or schedules of reinforcement? Anything we've done up to this point? You want me to give you guys a little bit of time? I mean, you don't have to have a question. I just feel that we only meet once a week. I only see you every other week. And I want to give you the opportunities that you can to ask questions. So that's why I'm kind of emphasizing that. But I can give you guys a few minutes to gather your thoughts, and then we can come back and
well, in reference to what Cece was talking about earlier, she was trying to make a decision on whether to continue with what she was doing or discontinue what she was doing. That would basically fall under the decision analysis stuff we're doing with Dr. Cohen, correct?
Yes. Now, one of the things that I left out, and that's very, very accurate. One of the pieces that I left out is we need some baseline data, all right? And that's the part that I think CC doesn't have. So what you want to do is this. This is where you've got to put all the pieces together, but don't be overzealous about it, okay? So decide based on where you're thinking things are, based on the most informative pieces of information that you have. All right, I think this is the problem. Here's a tactic that matches with that problem. Went to the research and I found something about it. All right, now, so here's what I have planned to put in. But why do I want to put that in? I need a measurement on something. So before I put the ammunition in the gun and shoot, I want some data to determine what am I dealing with here. So what I want to know is, just in the little bit I know about CC's scenario, is how many responses am I getting based on how many I'm expected to get? All right, and how many of those are independent? Am I having to prompt everything? And I want a baseline on that. I want, my neighbor is doing something very strange, okay? And it shocked me. All right, I think all is good. He just knelt down in the middle of my yard and rubbed his hands through my grass. And I thought this was going to be, I don't know, I thought it was some kind of homage to something. I'm not sure. Okay, all right, that kind of sidetracked me. All right, but we need a baseline measure. All right, you need to, and CC, it might look like this. On any given day, I have between 10 and 20 responses I need them to do in this classroom. On day one, they did 5 out of 10 unprompted. Notice I'm not talking about correct responses. I'm thinking your problem is you got to get the kids to actually do something, all right? So don't mix up the correct responses with that just yet. Okay, so on day one, there were 10 opportunities, they did 5. But on day 2, there were 20 opportunities and they did 7. So when the number of opportunities to the thing I'm trying to measure changes from day to day, I can't just record the number of times that they responded. I need to record that out of a percentage. So day 1, they had 5 out of 10 responses that were unprompted, 50%. Day 2, they had 7 out of 20 unprompted responses, 35%. All right, and you would do that over time. And then you're going to analyze that and say, I am getting an average across the board of responses that are overall 25% of the time. And my trend in the data, and here's what the important piece, it's increasing. It's going up, it's getting better. Well, I don't necessarily want to intervene just yet because my data are telling me things are getting better with just the way I'm doing it right now. However, if my trend is flat or descending after a week plus, and the reason I'm saying that, typically you want 6 data points on what you need to have baseline on. And so what that allows you to do, guys, it allows you to really determine what is happening under the current conditions. I might want my students to be responding at 90% or 80%. Okay, maybe that's not satisfactory that it's going up, but it's only hit 60%. However, you're intervening with an increasing trend, an ascending trend. And that is typically problematic because you are not going to know, and this goes back to what I told CC to start off with. Why did it continue to increase? Is it because of what it was already doing? Or was it because what I just added to the mix? And you can see, maybe the trajectory is higher, but then you need a little bit more definitive evidence. And the reason why we spend so much time teaching you how to make that determination is because you don't have a lot of time and the kids don't have a lot of time. And what we want you to be able to see is definitively whether it was your behavior that made the difference. Because if you cannot determine that based on the graph, it is not your behavior that made the difference. Therefore, why would you keep doing the same thing over and over? That's it. It's for those reasons why we want to teach you, and you have authentic responses to behavior, and that is critical there. All right. Sorry that I went on that little soapbox, but I think that I'm trying to take the opportunity to make some definitive points that I want to serve as an epiphany for some of you. All right. So Cece, what you thinking, what you're not thinking, what you're doing, what you're not. I could see some wheels turning, and I see the wheels turning of others also. So.
Well, oh, can you hear me, or?
Yeah.
I know, I don't want to stay on it, and maybe this is just a separate time, but so then I can measure prompt, I can therefore, what I think I'll measure is prompting levels, whether it's independent or verbal, or should I go in that direction, or is that right or not? Because the students start.
Stop. No, you want, do you want them to respond independently? Is that your target?
Correct. Yes, that is
Okay.
my target.
Then the prompt needs to occur in the correction procedure, not in the antecedent. Once they do not respond independently, that response is an incorrect response. Okay. And okay. So what I'm going to tell you is in your correction procedure, meaning they were supposed to do it and they didn't. Okay. It's a minus for that response. And you're obviously going to correct it. If they get a response, that's still a minus for that response. All right. Don't record the prompting levels. Provide a consistent level of prompting. Like figure out, if I just gesture or model in the correction procedure, they have it. Oh, I need to provide physical guidance for them to have it. I would start off with that because it's part of your correction procedure. It's not part of your teaching procedure. All right. So just determine what that might look like for each child. Then we can look at different prompting levels as to what might make for the best error correction procedure. But if we keep changing it, it's going to get up from under us and we won't be able to analyze that. Okay. Always count what you want. Count what you want to see. All right. That's critical because then you're going to do what you count. And you always want to do what you want. You want to harvest that outcome. All right, those are good questions so far. Anything else?
I have a question, but it's not directly related to punishment.
Doesn't have to be.
I'm
Okay.
not quite sure, like I can't wrap my head around when a variable interval schedule would be put into place.
A variable interval schedule.
Wait,
Almost anything you're going to do that's with fluid behavior is that it's not a discrete response, okay? Because what you're looking for is after the interval is over, are they still doing it or not? It could be a discrete response also. It also could be related to your availability or how often can you get to the individual. You know, like let's say you're trying to work the whole classroom and there's 20 people. You might end up by default having certain behaviors on a variable interval schedule.
okay, that makes sense.
Right, and the variation, Heather, is really important because if you remember correctly, when you look at what are the patterns of responding under variable schedules, you're going to get a much higher slope in correct responding. And when it's variable, it's unpredictable. So they don't know what's happening, right? And I don't mean they don't know that they're supposed to be following the rules. They don't know when you're going to be reinforcing. And that keeps them on their toes, for lack of a better way to think of it. Okay?
Okay.
All right. I just want to make sure you guys are leaving on solid ground. Hopefully you understand that reinforcement and punishment are determined by the effect it has on the behavior. Wait, hold on. How would you define an interval for something that is variable on a variable ratio? You wouldn't. You wouldn't do interval and ratio. It's variable ratio or interval. Does that make sense, Kayla? Okay, now with gambling, it is typically, it could be either or. Okay, so it's not, it is, the schedule is on what the play is. So if it's pulling the lever, it may be I have to pull that lever 27 times and I'll win something. Then the next time I may pull that lever 160 times and I'll win something. And next time I pull that lever 312 times and I'll win something. So what I'm talking about winning, I'm not talking about sky falling. You know, 2 coins, 30 coin, and, you know, it's calibrated that way. So it's a discrete response. It's not like I'm just pulling, and then I keep pulling and 3 minutes stop and I get reinforced, or 15 minutes stop and my behavior gets reinforced, and so on. So it's probably more of a ratio because you have a very discrete response, okay? It's probably not related to, I'm in front of the slot machine for 27 minutes and the next pull, it's coming down. I'm in front of the slot machine. I'm not necessarily playing all the time. And then an hour and 20 minutes, it's coming down. Could be, but I'm not sure. But I tell you who does know, all the casino owners. So I can assure you they are very in tune with appropriate schedules of reinforcement. And they get it, all right? They get it big time. So I'm not sure if that answered your question. What I meant was that an FR1 or an F what one? FR1, all right. That as an FR1 schedule, every time the behavior occurs, you reinforce it. Now I'm not following you. So how would you determine if it's a VR1, a VR2, a VR3? You would not be able to. Oh, yeah, you would actually look at the duration of the whole session and then figure out on average what it would be. So when you're collecting data to determine what the schedule of reinforcement needs to be, that's why the collecting of data is so important. Then you might determine what you need to calibrate your schedule of reinforcement at. So you can't do it just with one. You can't do it just with two. You really need 3 or more opportunities for the behavior to be emitted in order to figure out the average. So think of it this way: in a month's time, a child's tacting was on a VR 7 for points or tokens, all right? Well, what you need to be able to determine is, in that month, what was the schedule? That's what you put them on, but what ended up happening? So it's possibly that it was 3 times, 10 times, 14 times, and then the kid left for that day. And then they came back. Where did you start? You know, you have it calibrated to do it on a VR7, but that might not be exactly how it plays out. Maybe at the end of the month, you've calculated it and it was a VR6 instead of a VR7. That's not going to make that much of a difference. What is important is it on a variable ratio schedule to start off with? And how did you fade that? How did you transfer from a fixed to a variable? What is the plan for continuing to fade, and so on? So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question or not. All right. So only reinforcement and get the letter correct with an edible. All right, a couple of things. First of all, how long have they been on? And it's letter identification by what? By pointing, or is it textually responding? How are they identifying the letter? Matching? Let's go through that first. All right, so that is a textual response. All right. You have a text, they're responding to it, boom. Okay, now, how long is a while? Okay, how long, what do you mean by that? What I want to know is how much data. Do you have 6 sessions of data? You have 5 data paths or 6 data points to those responses. And is the trend ascending, descending, or no trend? Oh, all right. So they came back in, but again, how long was it occurring for? All right. You don't want to overrun something because that's going to be a problem. All right. You're going to put the behavior on extinction, possibly because the wrong schedule of reinforcement is going to be in place. I think there's a lot to consider here, even for a simple program like that. So what you want to know is, why don't you send me a snapshot of what the data looks like? You don't have to do it now, but for me to definitively answer, I need that. Then if it's in repertoire, if they mastered it, but it continues to be run, it needs to be on a different schedule of reinforcement. And we need to talk about how not to run maintenance on things. You want to run programs that once they master it, you want to run a program that's fluency based. I have to do a certain number of responses in a short amount of time, or you want to recombine it with something else. You don't want to just run maintenance. So that's my other question. So I want to see the data to determine if it's been mastered. If it hasn't been mastered, then it's kind of going back to Tanya's point earlier. That's exactly what you're going to be learning in what's a missed decision, what is a program that's overrun, what is a decision error. And that starts really giving you a feel as to how to interpret data, which all of our responses to data have to be based on the visual inspection of the thing we're measuring. And in your case, it's measuring see and say letters by textually responding. So take a little picture of it, white out the child's name or any identifiables. I just want to see the graph for that particular program. And I think I could be much more effective. All right.
Dr. Grant,
Yes.
it's Marie. I have
Yeah.
a question. For the stimulus, because I don't know if anybody else is having as many problems as I am with these BDS modules. I swear the answers change every day, but my question is this: a stimulus is anything in the environment, anything.
Anything. We have
Okay.
antecedent stimuli, we have consequential stimuli.
Okay, so if I'm working with a student and my reinforcers are M&Ms, and I put the M&Ms on the table, okay? So I need them to man the letters. They man the letters, they get an M&M, okay? Is it possible that putting the M&Ms on the table could eventually become an antecedent stimulus? Does
Not
it
for
make
the,
sense?
okay, you are setting up a motivating operation with that. There's
Okay.
some goods and you might have some of it, okay? It could certainly be an antecedent for something else, but it's not necessarily, nor do you want it to form the operant on the front side. So what I mean by that is you don't want them under the antecedent stimulus control of those M&Ms.
Okay.
You want them under the antecedent stimulus control of the stimuli related to what you're trying to teach them.
Okay. Okay. I should have used just the behavior is just sitting in their seats. That's what I want them to do.
Okay.
So every time I see them sitting in their seats,
So there's, you don't want the antecedent stimulus to be the M&Ms. You need the antecedent stimulus to be the seat, the fact that you're providing instruction, or your command. Those things should result in stimulus control over the behavior. If the presence of the M&Ms start to control the behavior, you are under faulty stimulus control at that point.
okay. And so what should you do then? Start pairing it, doing stimulus pairing with something else, or just eliminate the M&Ms altogether?
Look, you could deliver the M&Ms. I don't know if I would always deliver an M&M. I think you
Well,
need
no, of course.
variety there, okay? But in order to make sure that it doesn't become inadvertently attached to the antecedent stimulus, I would sometimes keep them in a little bag for yourself and deliver. You can do stimulus. Sometimes leave them on the table. Other times, hand them the box and let them take their own. Other times, don't show them anywhere where it is and just deliver it intermittently, okay? That is how you're going to do stimulus pairing, but it should not always be part of the antecedent stimulus, because I hope that's making sense, that you're going to have what you want to serve as antecedent stimulus control is typically the presence of a chair when that is coupled with an instruction or a command. So if I'm like, all right, let's get ready, you want the child in the chair ready to go. If you say, okay, back from lunch, let's have a seat, you want the child in the chair. If it is completely under the control of the presence of that M&M prior, that's being paired with your antecedent every time, then the likelihood of that bearing control over the behavior is pretty high. Okay, even if you would deliver a different suite after that, because it's been paired with access, it's been pretty high. So you want to vary the parts of the stimulus that are not essential. Okay, so whatever it is that you're trying to get the child to respond to, and it shouldn't be the M&M because that's your consequence. It's okay to show it every now and then. It's okay to vary it because you don't want the presence of it to bear control over the behavior.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right, have we gotten to the end of the rope yet? All right, I think we'll call it a night. It was great to see everyone. Love the enthusiasm. Whoa, whoa. All right. Email me. You can schedule meetings with me. I've met with several of you. You definitely do that some more. And whatever I need to do to help, you can count on that.
Hey, Dr. Grant,
Yes, ma'am.
I think this is going to be from all of us because we know where you live. Be safe with beta. Yeah, I don't think that's going to be a problem. Right, unless something's changed that you guys know about that I don't. Okay.
It's going back in the Gulf, and that's what they said. They're predicting it's going back in the Gulf, and then it's coming back to us.
Emily, is that recent?
Yes, that's within the past like hour or two.
Oh, that's great.
I just noticed it too. So it's, let's see.
Weather channel on, look right here. So, you know, you guys have captivated my attention, so I'm not paying
3 hours
attention
ago.
to the bomb that's going off. But
3 hours ago.
I'm assuming that it's it looked like it wasn't able to pick up any strength because of all the cool air. So I'm banking on that.
Yeah, as of right now, it says tropical storm beta forecast is the new forecast cone for beta suggests that after the storm makes landfall in Texas, it will go back out into the Gulf of Mexico before making a second landfall in Louisiana. And we are basically completely in the cone, like especially like our area.
Yeah.
And then like the lower line is not.
35 or 45 miles an hour, I'm not worried about that, you know, so we got this, okay?
Hopefully.
Thanks for looking out for me. I appreciate it. I guess somebody has to look out for me, right? Like somebody's got to do that. So I appreciate you taking the lead on that, Cece. All right. All right, guys. Thanks so much. I will see you soon.
Okay,
Bye.
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 Be sending you an email to schedule our first session. Okay. All right. Hasta luego.